When my mother's voice cut through the Christmas party laughter, it wasn't the volume that made everyone freeze. It was the precision of her words, sharp enough to slice through years of polite silence. "Why can't you be more like Victoria?" she said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "At least she's made something of herself." I stood there, champagne glass trembling in my hand, feeling 32 years of disappointment crystallize into that single moment. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my phone was about to ring. And when Warren Buffett's name flashed across the screen, everything they believed about me, about success, about worth, was about to shatter like the ornaments hanging from their perfect tree. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Alex Morgan, and this is the story of how I learned that the people who see you as small are often the ones standing on your shoulders. The Portland rain had turned to snow 3 days before Christmas, transforming the city into something from a postcard nobody believed was real. I sat in my apartment in the Pearl District, the kind of place my mother called quaint when she meant inadequate, staring at an email I'd read 17 times already. The sender's name alone made my hands shake. Berkshire Hathaway. The subject line read simply, "Lunch confirmation, December 28th, Omaha." I had built something remarkable over the past 4 years, a sustainable technology company that was about to change how the world thought about renewable energy storage. The prototype in my tiny office downtown had attracted attention from investors I'd only dreamed of meeting. But my family didn't know any of this. To them, I was still Alex, the one who dropped out of law school, the one who couldn't hold down a corporate job, the one who chose passion over prestige and paid for it with their constant disappointment. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen, my mother, though I'd never been allowed to call her anything but mother growing up. The message was brief, efficient, wrapped in the kind of politeness that felt like obligation. "The Christmas party is at 6. Victoria and Marcus will be here at 5:30. Don't be late. And please try to dress appropriately this time." I looked down at my faded jeans and sweater, the uniform of someone who spent more time in laboratories than boardrooms, and felt that familiar squeeze in my chest, the one that whispered I would never be enough, no matter what I accomplished. The party itself loomed like a performance I'd rehearsed but never perfected. Every year the same script. Victoria would arrive in something elegant and expensive, Marcus at her side like a trophy husband, and they would hold court in the living room of my parents' West Lynn home. The house sat on 2 acres, every window glowing with warm light, every surface decorated with the kind of precision that came from hiring professionals. My mother took pride in her Christmas gatherings the way generals took pride in successful campaigns. Everything had its place, including me, always slightly to the side, always just outside the circle of accomplishment she drew around my sister. I arrived at 5:45, parking my 10-year-old Honda between Victoria's Tesla and Uncle Greg's Mercedes. The driveway alone told the story my family believed about success. I grabbed the bottle of wine I'd brought, something modest from a local vineyard, knowing it would be placed on a side table and forgotten while everyone praised whatever vintage Marcus had selected. The front door opened before I could knock, and there stood my father, Robert, his smile genuine even if his hug felt apologetic. "Alex," he said warmly, pulling me inside. "Good to see you, kid." He was the only one who still called me kid, the only one whose affection didn't come with conditions attached. Inside, the house smelled of pine and cinnamon, the kind of holiday atmosphere that belonged in magazines. Victoria stood by the fireplace, her black dress probably costing more than my monthly rent, holding court with Aunt Diane and Cousin Brandon. She saw me enter and her smile flickered, not quite reaching her eyes, the way it never did when I was the audience. "Alex," she said, her voice projecting across the room. "You made it. We were just talking about the Hendricks merger. Marcus closed the deal yesterday. $12 million. The number hung in the air like a challenge. I smiled, set down my wine, and joined the outer edge of their conversation, already feeling like a guest in a home where I'd grown up. My mother emerged from the kitchen, looking immaculate in cream and gold, her hair styled in a way that suggested hours of preparation. She scanned the room with the efficiency of a quality control inspector, her gaze landing on me with that familiar flicker of assessment and disappointment. "Alex, you're here," she said, and somehow she made it sound like I'd arrived uninvited. "Help me with the appetizers, would you?" It wasn't a question. In my family, requests from Helen Morgan were commands dressed in pleasantries. I followed her into the kitchen, where trays of catered food waited to be arranged, and immediately felt the shift in her demeanor. Away from the guests, her smile dropped. "I wish you'd worn something nicer," she said quietly, not looking at me. "Victoria brought a photographer friend. We're taking family pictures later." The criticism landed with practiced ease, finding the spaces in my armor that had never quite healed. "I wore what I have, Mother," I said, keeping my voice steady. She made a small sound, something between a sigh and a dismissal, and handed me a tray. "Just try not to stand too close to Victoria in the photos. The contrast is already obvious enough." The words should have hurt less after 32 years, but they never did. Each comment was a paper cut, small enough to seem insignificant, frequent enough to leave scars. I carried the tray into the living room, arranged the food on the designated table, and retreated to the corner by the bookshelf where I'd spent most of my childhood Christmases. Jamie Torres, my business partner and the closest thing I had to family by choice, had sent me a text earlier that day. "Survived the party yet? Remember, you're about to have lunch with one of the most successful investors in history. You've already won." I'd smiled at the message, letting it bolster me through the evening ahead. Jamie knew what I'd built because Jamie had helped me build it. We'd met 4 years ago at a renewable energy conference, two outsiders who believed the world could run on something other than fossil fuels and good intentions. The technology we developed together, a battery storage system that could revolutionize solar and wind energy, had taken everything I had. My savings, my time, my relationships, everything except my belief that it mattered. Dinner was served at 7. A catered affair with place cards that positioned me between Cousin Brandon and an empty chair that had been meant for someone's date who'd cancelled. Across the table, Victoria held court, discussing her latest case, some corporate litigation that involved millions of dollars and outcomes that would be written about in law journals. Marcus added details, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder, and my mother beamed with pride so bright it could have powered the chandelier above us. "Victoria's being considered for partner," Helen announced to the table, her voice ringing with triumph. "Youngest in the firm's history. We're so proud." Everyone applauded, glasses raised, and I joined in because that was the role I'd learned to play. The supportive sibling, the one who clapped loudest to hide the sound of their own heartbreaking. My father caught my eye from the head of the table and offered a small, sad smile that said he saw me, even if he didn't know how to change anything. Robert Morgan had built a successful career in real estate, providing the comfortable life that allowed my mother to cultivate her perfect family image. But he'd always been passive, a kind man who avoided conflict, who loved his daughters equally but protected neither from Helen's comparisons. "And Alex," Aunt Diane said, her voice bright with forced interest, "what have you been up to? Still working on that little tech thing?" The diminishment was casual, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. "Still working on it," I said, not elaborating. What was the point? They'd decided years ago what my story was, and nothing I said would rewrite their version. Victoria leaned forward, her expression something between curiosity and pity. "You know, Marcus's firm is hiring. I could put in a word if you wanted something more stable. Something with benefits and a real salary." She meant it kindly, in the way people mean things kindly when they've never questioned their right to offer advice. "I appreciate it," I said, "but I'm good where I am." My mother's fork clinked against her plate, a sound sharp enough to convey disapproval without words. "Alex has always been stubborn," she said to the table, smiling in a way that looked warm if you didn't know her. "Never could accept help, even when it was clearly needed." The conversation moved on, flowing around me like water around a stone, and I focused on my plate, counting the minutes until I could leave without causing a scene. After dinner, everyone gathered in the living room for drinks and the annual gift exchange. My mother had rules for this too, a spending limit, a requirement that gifts be thoughtful and appropriate. I'd brought books for everyone, carefully selected, knowing they'd be received with polite thanks and forgotten by New Year's. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria's gifts came in elegant boxes from stores I couldn't afford to window shop in. She gave Mother a scarf from Paris, Father cufflinks engraved with his initials, and me a planner for the new year. To help you get organized, she said brightly. And I wondered if she knew how condescending she sounded or if it was simply her default setting when addressing me. The photographer arrived at 9, a friend of Victoria's from college who set up lights and directed us into position for the family portrait. My mother fussed with everyone's placement, adjusting angles, smoothing hair, making sure the picture would reflect the image she wanted the world to see. When she got to me, she hesitated, her hand hovering near my shoulder, before gently guiding me to the back row, partially behind my father. Just step back a touch, she murmured. The lighting's better there. I stepped back, made myself smaller, and smiled when the photographer counted down. The flash captured what we'd always been. A family arranged by hierarchy, with me perpetually in the shadows. It was during the coffee and dessert service that everything changed. We were in the living room, the conversation flowing with wine-loosened ease, when my mother decided to make her disappointment public. I'd been quiet most of the evening, contributing little, existing mostly as audience to Victoria's achievements. Perhaps my silence bothered her, or perhaps she'd simply had enough wine to say what she usually left implied. You know what I don't understand, Helen said, her voice cutting through the ambient chatter. The room quieted, sensing something sharp beneath her tone. I don't understand how two daughters, raised in the same home, with the same opportunities, can turn out so differently. She wasn't looking at me, but everyone else was. Victoria shifted uncomfortably, Marcus's hand tightening on her knee. My father set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Aunt Diane and Uncle Greg exchanged glances that said they'd witnessed this dynamic before and knew better than to intervene. Mother, Victoria started, but Helen raised a hand, her gesture silencing everyone as effectively as a shout. No, I think this needs to be said. Victoria, you've built a career anyone would envy. You're successful, respected, financially secure. You've made choices that reflect well on this family. She paused, taking a sip of wine, and I knew what was coming with the certainty of someone who'd heard variations of this speech their entire life. And then there's Alex. The way she said my name, weighted with disappointment and resignation, made something inside me go very still. 4 years in that cramped office, working on a project nobody understands, barely making rent, no benefits, no security, no real future. At some point, sweetheart, you have to accept that passion doesn't pay bills. Victoria understood that. She chose a path that leads somewhere. The room had gone completely silent now, even the Christmas music seeming to fade into background static. I felt every eye on me, waiting to see how I'd respond, if I'd defend myself or simply absorb the criticism as I always had. My throat felt tight, my face hot, but I kept my expression neutral, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Maybe, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt, success looks different for different people. My mother laughed, not unkindly, but with the gentle condescension of someone explaining reality to a child. Success is security, Alex. It's being able to support yourself, to build a life, to contribute to society in meaningful ways. What you're doing, it's a hobby. A very expensive hobby that your father and I have watched drain years of your life. She leaned forward, her expression softening in a way that was somehow worse than her criticism. I say this because I love you. Because I want better for you than this endless struggle. Why can't you be more like Victoria? Just once, why can't you make a choice that doesn't end in disappointment? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized this was the moment I'd been heading toward my entire life. Every comparison, every dismissal, every time I'd been made to feel less than, had been building to this public declaration of my inadequacy. I opened my mouth, not sure what I was going to say, when my phone rang. The sound cut through the tension like a blade, loud and jarring in the silent room. I pulled it from my pocket, intending to silence it, when I saw the name on the screen. Warren Buffett. For a moment I thought I was hallucinating, that the stress of the evening had caused some kind of break from reality. But the name stayed there, solid and real, and my hand moved without conscious thought to answer. Hello, I said, my voice uncertain, aware that everyone in the room was staring at me with varying degrees of irritation at the interruption. The voice on the other end was warm, slightly gravelly, unmistakably real. Alex? Warren Buffett here. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. My heart stopped, stuttered, then raced. No, I managed. No, this is fine. He chuckled, the sound of someone who'd made 1,000 important calls and knew the impact his name carried. I wanted to confirm our lunch meeting on the 28th. My team's been reviewing your battery technology and I have to tell you what you've built is extraordinary. We need to discuss investment terms in person. I'm thinking we start with 15 million, but I suspect that number's going to climb considerably once we dig into the details. The silence in my parents' living room had transformed from awkward to suffocating in the seconds it took for Warren Buffett's words to register. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, watching my mother's face cycle through confusion, irritation, and something that might have been the first flicker of doubt. "I'm sorry," I said into the phone, my voice steadier now. "Could you repeat that? I want to make sure I heard correctly." Warren chuckled again, that grandfatherly warmth that had disarmed countless CEOs and world leaders. 15 million to start, Alex. Your sustainable battery storage system is exactly what the renewable energy sector has been waiting for. The efficiency numbers your team sent over, the scalability potential, the manufacturing cost projections, it's all incredibly impressive. But we can discuss the details when you're in Omaha. I just wanted to touch base personally and let you know how excited we are about this partnership. My hand trembled slightly as I held the phone, aware that every person in the room was now leaning forward, straining to hear the other side of the conversation. Victoria's champagne glass had stopped halfway to her lips. Marcus had straightened in his seat, his corporate lawyer instincts clearly catching the significant phrases filtering through my half of the dialogue. My father's expression had shifted from his usual diplomatic neutrality to something approaching wonder. "Thank you, Mr. Buffett," I said, and the name landed in the room like a grenade. "I'll see you on the 28th. I'm looking forward to discussing the partnership in detail." We exchanged a few more pleasantries, confirmed the time and location, and when I ended the call, the silence that followed was profound enough to hear the snow falling outside the windows. Helen Morgan, my mother, the woman who had just publicly dissected my life choices in front of the entire family, stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, searching for words that wouldn't come. It was Victoria who spoke first, her voice carefully controlled in that lawyer way she had when she was processing information faster than she could articulate it. "Did you just take a phone call from Warren Buffett?" she asked. "On Christmas Eve?" I slid my phone back into my pocket, my hand still shaking but my voice finding a strength I hadn't known I possessed. "Yes," I said simply. "We're having lunch next week to discuss his investment in my company." Uncle Greg set down his drink with enough force to slosh scotch onto the mahogany side table my mother treasured. "Investment," he repeated. "What investment? What company?" And there it was, the question that opened the door I'd kept closed for 4 years. The door that protected my work from their skepticism, my dreams from their diminishment, my progress from their judgment. I told myself I was waiting until everything was certain, until the technology was proven, until I had something undeniable to show them. But standing there in that perfectly decorated living room, feeling the weight of my mother's recent words still hanging in the air like smoke, I realized I'd been protecting something else entirely. I'd been protecting myself from the possibility that even success wouldn't be enough to change how they saw me. "The company I've been building for the past 4 years," I said, my voice gaining confidence with each word. "The one you called a hobby, Mother? The cramped office you dismissed? That's where my team and I developed a revolutionary battery storage system for renewable energy. We've created technology that can store solar and wind power with 93% efficiency, at half the cost of anything currently on the market. The prototype has been tested by 3 independent laboratories, and the results have been verified by some of the leading energy researchers in the world." I watched their faces as I spoke, seeing the calculations happening behind their eyes, the recalibration of their understanding of who I was and what I'd been doing while they'd written me off as the family disappointment. Marcus leaned forward, his corporate instincts overriding his surprise. 93% efficiency, he said. "That's not just revolutionary, that's market disrupting. If those numbers are real, you're talking about transforming the entire renewable energy infrastructure." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Warren Buffett doesn't invest in maybes. If he's offering 15 million as a starting point, he's seen validated data. Real verified, replicable results." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Of course, Marcus would be the first to truly grasp what this meant. He lived in the world of venture capital and corporate acquisitions, where numbers were truth and potential was currency. The data's been validated, I confirmed. Multiple times by multiple sources. We're 3 months from filing our final patents and 6 months from beginning production partnerships. My father stood up slowly, his movement drawing everyone's attention. Robert Morgan was not a demonstrative man, but the expression on his face was one I'd never seen before, pride mixed with something that looked almost like regret. "Alex," he said quietly, crossing the room to stand in front of me. "Why didn't you tell us? For years, all this time, why didn't you say anything?" The question was gentle, without accusation, but it cut deeper than my mother's earlier criticisms because it was asked with genuine confusion. I looked at him, this kind man who'd loved me but never protected me from the comparisons, and felt something crack open in my chest. Because every time I tried to talk about my work, I was interrupted with job offers, advice about getting something stable, suggestions that I was wasting my time. Because passion projects don't deserve respect in this family, unless they come with a corporate title and a 6-figure salary. I turned to face my mother, who still hadn't spoken, her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "You asked me why I couldn't be more like Victoria," I said, and my voice was steady now, clear and unwavering. "The answer is because I never wanted to be. Victoria chose a path that made sense to you, that fit into your understanding of success. She's brilliant at what she does, and I've never once begrudged her that. But I chose a different path, one that terrified me every single day. One that meant living in a cramped apartment and working 100-hour weeks and risking everything on the possibility that I could create something that mattered. Not something that would impress you, but something that would actually change the world." Aunt Diane made a small sound, something between a gasp and a laugh, and I realized my hands were clenched at my sides, my entire body vibrating with 4 years of suppressed frustration and hurt. Every Christmas, every family dinner, every phone call, I've sat here and absorbed your disappointment like it was my responsibility to carry it. I've watched you celebrate Victoria's achievements, which she absolutely deserves, while treating my life's work like an embarrassing phase I'd eventually outgrow. And tonight, in front of everyone we know, you decided to make it explicit. To finally say out loud what you've been implying for years, that I'm the daughter who couldn't measure up, who made the wrong choices, who was too stubborn or too stupid to understand what real success looks like. Helen finally found her voice, and when she spoke, it came out thin and uncertain. "Alex, I didn't mean it like that. I was concerned about your future, about your stability." I shook my head, cutting her off. "You meant exactly what you said, Mother. You always do. You're just not used to being wrong about me." The words hung between us, sharp and final, and I saw something shift in her expression, a crack in the armor of certainty she'd always worn when discussing my life choices. Victoria stood up, setting down her champagne with careful precision. "Alex," she said, her lawyer voice activating, the one she used to mediate conflicts and find middle ground. "I think everyone's a bit shocked right now. This is incredible news, truly, but maybe we should all take a breath and process what's happening." I looked at my sister, this woman I'd spent my entire life being compared to, and felt a complicated tangle of emotions I couldn't begin to unravel. "There's nothing to process, Tori," I said, using the childhood nickname I hadn't spoken in years. "I've spent 4 years building something extraordinary, while everyone in this room assumed I was failing. And I let you assume it because somewhere deep down, I believed that if I couldn't make you proud on your terms, then maybe I didn't deserve to exist on mine. But tonight, when Mother asked why I couldn't be more like you, something broke. Not in a bad way, but in a way that finally let the light in." I took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over the room. Warren Buffett isn't the only person interested in our technology. We've had inquiries from Tesla, from the European Union's Renewable Energy Consortium, from 3 different venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. We've been keeping it quiet while we finalized our patents, but the preliminary interest alone has valued the company at somewhere between $80 and $100 million. The number hit the room like a physical force. Cousin Brandon choked on his wine. Uncle Greg's face went through several shades of red. Marcus muttered something under his breath that sounded like a calculation. And my mother, Helen Morgan, the woman who had orchestrated this entire evening to showcase her perfect family, simply stared at me as if I were a stranger who'd wandered into her living room wearing her daughter's face. 80 million, she repeated, the words barely audible. Your little hobby, the one in the cramped office, is worth $80 million? I could have been kind in that moment. I could have softened the blow, reassured her that her concerns had been natural, that she couldn't have known. But 4 years of dismissal, of condescension, of being made to feel small in the one place I should have felt safe, had left marks that didn't fade just because the truth had finally surfaced. The office isn't cramped, Mother. It's efficient. And it's not a hobby. It never was. It's a company with 12 full-time employees, 2 pending patents, and technology that's going to help accelerate the world's transition away from fossil fuels. It's the thing I've poured my heart and soul into while you've been telling anyone who'd listen that I was the daughter who couldn't get her life together. My father moved toward my mother, his hand reaching for her arm in a gesture that was both supportive and restraining. She looked at him, then back at me, and for the first time in my adult life I saw my mother at a complete loss for words. The matriarch who always had an opinion, who orchestrated every family gathering with military precision, who knew exactly what everyone should be doing with their lives, stood silent in her perfectly decorated living room, confronted with the reality that she'd been fundamentally wrong about her own daughter. Jamie Torres had sent me another text during the phone call with Warren Buffett. I pulled out my phone and read it now, needing the grounding presence of someone who actually knew me, who'd been there through the failures and breakthroughs in 3 a.m. problem-solving sessions that had built what we'd created. The message was simple. You still there? Need an extraction? I smiled despite everything, despite the tension crackling through the room like static electricity, despite the way my mother's face had gone pale and my sister looked like she was trying to solve an impossible equation. I typed back quickly. I think I'm good. Might need a drink later though. The response came immediately. I'm at Groundwork Cafe. Come by when you're done being a superhero. I looked up from my phone to find everyone still staring at me, waiting for something, though I wasn't sure what. An explanation? An apology? Some way to rewind the evening back to before Warren Buffett's call had shattered the carefully constructed narrative of my inadequacy? I should go, I said finally, the words feeling both liberating and terrifying. Victoria stepped forward, her hand reaching out as if to stop me. Alex, wait. We should talk about this. Really talk. I met her eyes, seeing genuine concern there mixed with something that might have been guilt. My sister wasn't cruel, had never been deliberately unkind. She'd simply accepted our mother's framing of our lives, had believed the story that her success somehow illuminated my failure by contrast. We can talk, Tori, I said gently, but not tonight. Tonight, I need to be somewhere where people see me for who I actually am, not who they've decided I should be. My father walked me to the door, his movements slow and deliberate, like he was processing something too large to fully grasp. In the hallway, away from the others, he pulled me into a hug that felt different from the one that had greeted me just hours earlier. This one held regret, apology, and a recognition that couldn't be put into words. I'm proud of you, kid, he whispered against my hair. I should have said it more. Should have asked more questions, should have listened better. Your mother, she just wanted security for you. But she went about it all wrong. We both did. I hugged him back, feeling tears prick at my eyes for the first time that evening. I know, Dad. I know. He pulled back, his hands on my shoulders, his eyes searching my face. Warren Buffett, he said, shaking his head slightly. My daughter is having lunch with Warren Buffett to discuss a $15 million investment in technology she created. Jesus, Alex. That's extraordinary. I grabbed my coat from the closet, feeling the weight of the evening settling into my bones. Behind us, I could hear low voices in the living room, the urgent tones of people trying to make sense of information that didn't fit their established understanding of reality. My mother's voice rose above the others briefly, something about needing to sit down, and I felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and guilt. I'd wanted to prove them wrong, had fantasized about this moment more times than I cared to admit. But now that it was here, it didn't feel quite like I'd imagined. The vindication was real, but it was wrapped in sadness, in the recognition of all the years we'd spent talking past each other, seeing different versions of the same life. Do you want me to come with you? My father asked. Talk to your mother. Help smooth things over? I shook my head, pulling on my coat. No, Dad. This is something she needs to sit with. They all do. For 4 years, they've had a story about who I am and what my life means. That story just got rewritten, and they need time to process it without me there to manage their reactions. The snow had picked up since I'd arrived, transforming the manicured neighborhood into a winter postcard. I sat in my Honda for a long moment before starting the engine, watching through the window as shapes moved behind the curtains of my parents' house. The Christmas lights they'd strung so carefully seemed garish now, too bright against the soft darkness of the snow. My phone buzzed with messages, first from Victoria. Please don't leave angry. I'm sorry for how tonight went. I had no idea about any of this. Then from Marcus. Your battery tech, the specifications you mentioned, I'd love to see the white papers. What you've described could be worth significantly more than 80 million if the data holds. And finally, surprisingly, from my mother, come back inside. We need to talk about this properly. I read them all but didn't respond, not yet. Instead, I started the car and pulled out of the driveway, leaving the perfect house and the perfect party and the perfectly shocked family behind me. Groundwork Cafe sat in a quiet corner of downtown Portland, the kind of place that stayed open late for insomniacs and artists and people who needed somewhere to exist outside the normal rhythms of the world. Jamie was at our usual table by the window, 2 cups of coffee already waiting, steam rising in lazy spirals. They looked up when I walked in, snowflakes melting in my hair, and their expression shifted from concern to relieved. You're alive, they said. I was 50-50 on whether you'd murder someone or have a breakdown in the bathroom. I slid into the seat across from them, wrapping my hands around the warm coffee cup, feeling the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation finally beginning to ebb. Neither, I said, though it was close a few times. Jamie leaned back, studying my face with the familiarity of someone who'd seen me at my worst and best. So Warren called? They nodded. During your mother's Christmas party. During her annual performance review of your inadequacy. Perfect timing. I laughed, the sound surprising me, and felt something tight in my chest finally start to loosen. He called right after she asked why I couldn't be more like Victoria, I said. Right after she told the entire room that my passion project was really just an expensive hobby draining years of my life. The timing was so perfect it felt scripted. Jamie grinned, the kind of smile that said they appreciated the cosmic irony of the universe. What did you tell them? I took a long sip of coffee, feeling the warmth spread through me, grounding me back in my body after the surreal evening. I told them everything. The efficiency numbers, the patent applications, the preliminary valuations, all of it. For years of keeping quiet, of protecting my work from their skepticism, and I just laid it all out on the table. Jamie's expression grew serious. How did they take it? I thought about my mother's pale face, Victoria's stunned silence, the way the entire room had seemed to tilt on its axis when Warren Buffett's name had entered the conversation. Like I'd announced I was secretly royalty from a country they'd never heard of. Shock, disbelief, recalculation. My mother literally couldn't speak for a solid minute, which might be a personal record. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the cafe's gentle ambient noise washing over us. Outside, Portland continued its transformation into a snow globe, rare and beautiful and temporary. You know this changes everything, Jamie said finally. Not just with your family but everything. Once Warren's investment is public, once the patents are filed and we start production partnerships, there's no going back to being invisible. You're going to be the face of this company, Alex. The person everyone points to as proof that sustainable energy storage is viable. I'd known this intellectually, had prepared for it in the abstract way you prepare for things that seem distant and theoretical. But hearing Jamie say it out loud, in the aftermath of the evening's revelations, made it real in a way that tightened my throat. I don't want to be famous, I said quietly. I just wanted to build something that mattered. Jamie reached across the table, their hand covering mine. Too late for that. You built something revolutionary. Fame is just the annoying side effect. My phone continued to buzz periodically, messages stacking up from family members processing the evening's revelations. I ignored them all except one, a text from my father that simply read, "Your mother is crying in the kitchen. Not sad crying, proud crying. She doesn't know how to tell you yet." The message hit differently than the others, piercing through my anger and hurt to the complicated truth underneath. My mother wasn't a villain, had never been trying to hurt me deliberately. She'd been operating from fear, from her generation's understanding of security and success, from a genuine if misguided belief that she was protecting me from failure. That didn't excuse the years of dismissal, the constant comparisons, the public humiliation of tonight. But it provided context, a reminder that people could be wrong and hurtful while still believing they were acting from love. My dad says my mother's crying, I told Jamie. Proud crying apparently. She just doesn't know how to express it yet. Jamie made a face. She's had 32 years to figure out how to be proud of you, Alex. Forgive me if I'm not immediately sympathetic to her sudden emotional crisis. I smiled despite everything, grateful for Jamie's fierce loyalty, even when it made them less than charitable toward my family. She's complicated, I said. They all are. Tonight was brutal, but it's also been building for years. All the small dismissals, the suggestions that I needed to be more practical, the concerned questions about my future that were really just criticism in disguise. It all came to a head because Warren Buffett decided to call right when she was telling everyone I was the disappointing daughter. Jamie's expression softened slightly. What are you going to do? Go back there tonight? Wait until tomorrow? Ignore them until the lunch with Warren and let them read about it in the Wall Street Journal? The vindictive part of me, the part that had absorbed years of being made to feel small, like that last option. But the part of me that still loved my family, that remembered my father's quiet support and Victoria's occasional attempts at connection, knew that burning bridges would only leave me isolated on the other side of this success. I'll talk to them, I said finally. But not tonight. Tonight I need to just sit here with you and process the fact that everything I've been working toward is actually happening. Warren Buffett believes in our technology. $15 million as a starting investment. Production partnerships on the horizon. Patents about to be filed. It's everything we dreamed about in that cramped office at 2 in the morning when the prototypes kept failing, and we thought we'd never crack the efficiency problem. Jamie raised their coffee cup in a toast. To proving everyone wrong, they said. And to being so spectacularly right that even Warren Buffett noticed. We clinked our cups together, the sound small and perfect in the quiet cafe, and I felt something shift inside me. Not healing exactly because the wounds from tonight were too fresh for that, but a sense that maybe finally I could stop trying to make my family understand me and simply exist as myself whether they got it or not. The snow continued to fall as we talked, mapping out the next steps for the company, discussing the meeting in Omaha, planning for the media attention that would inevitably follow Warren's investment announcement. By the time I left Groundwork Cafe, it was past midnight, technically Christmas Day, and the world felt hushed and new. I drove back to my apartment in the Pearl District, the streets nearly empty, Portland sleeping beneath its unexpected blanket of white. Inside my small space, surrounded by the life I'd built away from my family's expectations, I finally let myself feel the full weight of the evening. The confrontation, the vindication, the complicated tangle of anger and sadness and relief that came from finally being seen. I pulled out my laptop and opened the email from Warren Buffett's team, reading again the preliminary terms of the investment, the due diligence schedule, the timeline for announcing the partnership. It was real, all of it, more real than anything I'd ever accomplished. My phone lit up one more time before I went to bed, a text from Victoria. I've been thinking about tonight, about all the Christmases before tonight, and I realize I've been complicit in making you feel invisible. I'm sorry, Alex. I'm proud of you. I always have been, I just didn't know how to say it when Mom was so focused on her version of success. Can we have coffee this week? Just us? I read the message 3 times, feeling the sincerity beneath the carefully chosen words, recognizing my sister's olive branch for what it was. An acknowledgement that our family's dynamic had been broken, that she benefited from being the golden child while I'd absorbed the role of disappointment, and that maybe finally we could build something different. I typed back, "Coffee sounds good. But Tori, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry that you're successful. I'm angry that my success was invisible until it came with Warren Buffett's name attached. That's what needs to change." Her response came quickly. "I know. You're right. Let's talk about it. Really talk, not the surface conversation we usually have. You deserve that." I set the phone down and looked around my apartment, this space my mother had called inadequate, seeing it with new eyes. The makeshift desk where I'd drafted countless iterations of our patent applications. The whiteboard covered in equations and efficiency calculations. The small kitchen where Jamie and I had celebrated every breakthrough with cheap wine and cheaper pizza. This wasn't the life my family had wanted for me, but it was the life that had led to something extraordinary. And for the first time since Warren Buffett's call had shattered the Christmas party's carefully constructed illusion, I let myself feel proud. Not vindicated or righteous or superior, just genuinely deeply proud of what I'd built while everyone else had been certain I was failing. The snow had stopped by the time I finally went to bed, leaving Portland transformed and silent. Tomorrow would bring more conversations, more processing, more navigation of the complex terrain between who my family thought I was and who I'd actually become. But tonight, on Christmas Eve turning into Christmas Day, I let myself simply exist in the truth that I'd been right all along. That passion and security weren't opposing forces, that success could look different from what my mother had imagined, and that sometimes the best gift you could give yourself was the courage to be exactly who you were, even when everyone around you was certain you should be someone else. Christmas morning arrived with pale light filtering through my apartment windows, the snow from the night before creating a muffled quiet that made Portland feel like a different city entirely. I woke to 47 new messages, a number that would have seemed absurd any other day but made perfect sense given that I'd essentially detonated a bomb in the middle of my family's carefully constructed reality. I made coffee before looking at any of them, needing the ritual of grinding beans and waiting for water to boil, the familiar motions that grounded me when everything else felt unmoored. My hands were steadier than they'd been last night, my mind clearer, but there was still a tremor of unreality running through everything. Warren Buffett had called me. My mother had publicly declared me a disappointment. I'd revealed 4 years of hidden success in a single conversation. The night felt like something that had happened to someone else, a story I'd heard rather than lived. The messages, when I finally opened them, ranged from supportive to bewildered to demanding. My father had sent 3, each one a variation of checking if I was okay and suggesting we talk soon. Victoria had added 2 more to her late-night text. One asking about coffee times and another that simply said she'd been up all night thinking about our conversation. Marcus, surprisingly, had sent a message that was pure business, asking for contact information so his firm could discuss potential legal support for the patent filings and investment negotiations. Aunt Diane's text was brief and slightly defensive, claiming she'd always known I was working on something important, which was a fascinating revision of history given her little tech thing comment from the night before. Cousin Brandon had sent a friend request on LinkedIn, which felt both opportunistic and perfectly in character. And my mother, Helen, had sent a single message at 6 in the morning. Please come to breakfast. Just family. No performance, no audience. We need to talk properly. I stared at that last message for a long time, weighing the invitation against the wounds from the night before. The part of me that wanted to maintain distance, to let them sit with their shock and recalibrate their understanding without my presence to complicate it, argued for staying away. But another part, the one that still remembered childhood Christmases before the comparisons became unbearable, the part that loved my father's quiet kindness and recognized my sister's genuine attempt at reconciliation, knew that avoiding the conversation would only calcify the hurt into something permanent. I texted back, I'll come at 10. But mother, if this turns into another performance review of my life choices, I'm leaving. I mean it. Her response came immediately. No performance. Promise. Just honest conversation. That's all I'm asking for. Jamie called as I was getting dressed, their voice still rough with sleep. Please tell me you're not going back there today, they said without preamble. Please tell me you're giving yourself at least 24 hours before you walk back into that house. I pulled on jeans and a sweater, the same casual style that had bothered my mother so much last night, and felt a small spark of defiance at maintaining it. I'm going for breakfast, I said. Just immediate family. My mother promised it wouldn't be a performance. Jamie made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. Alex, your mother's entire life is a performance. She doesn't know how to exist without an audience and a script. They weren't wrong. But something in Helen's early morning text had felt different, stripped of the usual polish and certainty. Maybe, I said. But I think last night cracked something open. And if there's any chance of building something real with them, something that isn't based on their disappointment or my need to prove myself, I have to at least try. The drive to West Lynn felt longer in daylight, the snow-covered streets reflecting bright winter sun that made everything look clean and possibility-filled. I practiced what I might say, running through versions of conversations in my head, but none of them felt right. How did you explain to your family that their love had felt conditional for so long that you'd stopped believing you deserved it? How did you articulate that success without their recognition had been both liberating and lonely? These weren't conversations with scripts or neat resolutions. They were the messy, complicated discussions that required vulnerability from people who'd spent years protecting themselves from each other. My father opened the door before I could knock, as if he'd been watching for my car. His hug was immediate and tight, and when he pulled back, his eyes were red-rimmed in a way that suggested he hadn't slept much either. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I know it would have been easier to stay away." Inside, the house looked different in morning light, the elaborate Christmas decorations that had seemed so perfect last night now appearing slightly desperate, as if my mother had been trying to create something beautiful enough to distract from the dysfunction underneath. The living room had been cleaned, all evidence of the party removed, and the house smelled of coffee and something baking, my mother's default response to stress or emotion. Helen stood in the kitchen doorway, still in her robe, her hair unstyled, her face bare of makeup. I'd seen my mother without her armor so rarely that the sight stopped me in the hallway. She looked older, smaller, vulnerable in a way that made something in my chest tighten. "Alex," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on my name. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." Victoria appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray of coffee mugs, and I noticed she was also dressed casually, her usual polished appearance softened into something more accessible. "I made your favorite," she said, gesturing to the kitchen. "The cinnamon rolls from that bakery on Hawthorne. Marcus is staying at our place, giving us space. This is just us." We settled in the breakfast nook, a small sun-filled space that had always been my favorite part of the house, away from the formal dining room where so many uncomfortable family meals had played out. For a long moment nobody spoke, all of us holding our coffee mugs like shields, waiting for someone else to begin the conversation we'd been avoiding for years. It was my father who finally broke the silence, his voice gentle but firm. "I think we should start by acknowledging that last night was unacceptable," he said, looking directly at my mother. "Helen, what you said to Alex in front of everyone, that wasn't concern. That was cruelty dressed up as parenting." My mother flinched but didn't look away, and I saw her hands tighten around her mug. "You're right," she said quietly. "It was cruel. I told myself I was being honest, that someone needed to push Alex toward a more stable life, but the truth is I was embarrassed." The admission hung in the air, raw and unexpected. Victoria shifted in her seat, and I found myself leaning forward despite my intention to maintain distance. "Embarrassed?" I repeated. "Of me?" Helen nodded, tears beginning to well in her eyes, though she blinked them back with visible effort. "All my friends, the women I have lunch with, the families we socialize with, they all have children who are doctors, lawyers, executives, people with titles and salaries that make sense. And when they asked about you, I didn't know what to say. I couldn't explain what you were doing because I didn't understand it myself, and rather than admit that, rather than ask you to help me understand, I decided it meant you were failing. That it was easier than accepting that maybe I was the one who didn't get it." She set down her coffee cup, her hands trembling slightly. "I measured your worth by how easily I could explain you to other people. And that's not just wrong, Alex. That's a betrayal of everything a mother should be." The apology was more than I'd expected, more vulnerable and specific than the vague expressions of regret I'd anticipated. I felt my anger from the night before shifting, not disappearing but becoming more complicated, mixed with recognition that my mother was trying, genuinely trying, to acknowledge the damage she'd done. "For 4 years," I said, my voice steady but thick with emotion, "I've been working on something I believed could make a real difference in the world. And every time I came to family dinner, every time we talked on the phone, I felt myself getting smaller. Not because the work was failing, but because none of you asked about it in a way that suggested you thought it mattered. You offered me job applications and concerned advice and suggestions that maybe it was time to be more realistic. And I started to believe that maybe you were right, that maybe passion without your approval meant I was deluding myself. Victoria reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of mine, asking permission rather than assuming it. "I'm so sorry, Alex," she said. "I've been thinking about all the times I could have asked real questions, could have wanted to understand what you were building, instead of just accepting Mom's narrative that you were struggling. I benefited from being the daughter who made sense to them, and I never questioned what that cost you." I looked at my sister, seeing her clearly maybe for the first time in years, not as the impossible standard I was compared against but as another person trapped in our family's dynamic, playing the role assigned to her just as I'd been playing mine. "You weren't responsible for their comparisons," I said quietly. "But you're right that you could have questioned them. We both could have fought harder against the roles they cast us in." My father cleared his throat, drawing our attention. "I need to apologize too," he said. "I saw what was happening, saw how your mother's concerns were turning into criticism, how the comparisons were hurting you both, and I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that you were all adults and needed to work it out yourselves. But that was cowardice dressed up as respect for your independence. I should have said something years ago." The breakfast nook had become a confessional, all of us finally speaking truths that had been festering beneath the surface of our carefully maintained family facade. It was uncomfortable and painful and necessary, the kind of conversation that couldn't happen when we were performing our roles for extended family and friends. "The thing is," I said, looking at each of them in turn, "Warren Buffett's phone call doesn't change anything fundamental about who I am or what I've been doing. The work was always valuable, the technology was always revolutionary, my choices were always valid. His investment just made it visible to you in a way you couldn't dismiss." Helen nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes with a napkin. "You're absolutely right. And that's what I've been sitting with all night, the realization that I needed external validation from someone like Warren Buffett before I could see what was right in front of me all along. My daughter, my brilliant daughter, was changing the world, and I was too busy comparing her to my friends' children's corporate jobs to notice." She stood up suddenly, crossing to the window, her back to us as she looked out at the snow-covered yard. "I don't know how to fix this," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to undo years of making you feel invisible. But I want to try. I want to understand what you've built, not so I can explain it to my friends, but because it's your life's work and I should have cared enough to understand it all along." Victoria pulled her laptop from her bag, setting it on the table with a decisive click. "Then let's start now," she said, looking at me with an intensity one recognized from her courtroom work. "Alex, tell us about the technology. Not the version you'd give investors, not the elevator pitch. Tell us what you're actually doing, why it matters to you, what the breakthroughs were, what kept you up at night. Help us understand." I hesitated, old habits of protection making me want to deflect, to give them the simplified version that wouldn't require real engagement. But Victoria's expression was genuine, and my father had pulled his chair closer, and even my mother had turned from the window with an openness I'd never seen before. So I began to really talk about the 4 years they dismissed as a prolonged phase of irresponsibility. I told them about the fundamental problem with renewable energy storage, how solar panels and wind turbines could generate power, but storing that energy efficiently had been the bottleneck preventing widespread adoption. I explained the breakthrough Jamie and I had stumbled onto almost by accident, a new battery chemistry that used abundantly available materials instead of rare earth elements, making it both more efficient and dramatically cheaper to produce. I walked them through the hundreds of failed prototypes, the nights we thought we'd have to give up, the moment when the efficiency numbers finally hit 93% and we realized we'd actually done it. My mother returned to the table, asking questions that revealed she was actually listening, actually trying to grasp not just what we'd created but why it mattered. "So this technology," she said slowly, "it means homes could run entirely on solar power? Even at night, even during winter?" I nodded, feeling the familiar excitement that came from explaining the implications of our work. "Exactly. And not just homes. Entire communities, eventually entire cities. The technology scales in ways current battery systems don't." Victoria was taking notes on her laptop, her legal mind already thinking through applications and implications. "The patent protection on this must be incredibly complex," she said. "You're not just patenting a product, You're patenting a process, a chemistry, potentially multiple applications. I smiled, recognizing the shift in how she was engaging, treating my work with the same seriousness she brought to her corporate cases. We have 3 separate patent applications being filed simultaneously, I confirmed. The core battery chemistry, the manufacturing process, and the scaling methodology. Our lawyers think it's one of the most comprehensive renewable energy patent packages they've seen. My father leaned forward, his real estate developer mind catching on the practical implications. The production facilities for this, the partnerships you mentioned, you're talking about manufacturing at scale. That's not just technology development anymore, that's industrial infrastructure. We talked for over an hour, and somewhere in that conversation, something fundamental shifted. They stopped looking at my work as an inexplicable hobby and started seeing it as what it had always been. A serious scientific and business venture that required exactly the kind of dedication and intelligence they'd always valued, just applied in ways they hadn't understood. Helen asked about the team I'd built, and I told her about Jamie, about the engineers and researchers who joined us, about the culture we'd created in our supposedly cramped office. We have a policy, I explained. Every Friday afternoon we shut down work and just talk about why we're doing this. Everyone shares stories about climate change impact they've witnessed, communities that need access to reliable renewable energy, the future they want to build. It keeps us connected to the purpose behind the patents and profit projections. My mother's expression had gone soft, almost wistful. That sounds like the kind of workplace I wish I'd had, she said quietly. When I was younger, before I became a full-time mother and wife, I worked in environmental advocacy. Nothing glamorous, just grassroots organizing, but I cared about it so much. And then life happened, and I convinced myself that practical concerns mattered more than passion. Maybe that's why I pushed you so hard toward stability, Alex. I was projecting my own regrets onto your choices. It was the most honest thing my mother had ever shared about her life before she became Helen Morgan, hostess and matriarch. I'd known she'd worked in environmental advocacy, but she'd always mentioned it dismissively, as if it had been a youthful phase she'd outgrown. You gave up work you loved? I asked. She nodded, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug again, seeking its warmth. Your father's career was taking off, you girls needed attention, and someone had to manage the household. It made sense at the time, and I don't regret the choices exactly, but I think I buried the part of me that cared about making a difference. And when you chose passion over security, it triggered something I tried to forget about myself. Victoria had stopped taking notes, her attention fully on our mother. I never knew that, she said. You never talked about that work as something you missed. Helen smiled sadly. How could I? I'd built this entire identity around being the perfect wife and mother, around maintaining our social standing, around making sure you girls had every advantage. Admitting I missed the work I'd given up would have felt like saying that wasn't enough. The breakfast nook had become a space of unexpected honesty, layers of family mythology peeling away to reveal the complicated humans underneath. My father reached for Helen's hand, and she let him take it, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 40 years of marriage. You could go back to advocacy work, he said gently. The girls are grown. I'm planning to step back from the company in a few years. There's no reason you couldn't reconnect with that part of yourself. Helen looked at him with surprise, as if the possibility had never occurred to her. I'm 63 years old, Robert. That world has moved on without me. I leaned forward, an idea forming that felt both risky and right. Our company needs community outreach, I said. When we start production, we're going to be working with municipalities, environmental groups, community organizations. We need someone who understands both the technology and the grassroots advocacy side. Someone who can bridge that gap. My mother stared at me, processing what I was offering. Are you asking me to work for your company? I shook my head. I'm asking if you want to be part of something that matters. Not as my mother trying to fix her daughter's life, but as Helen Morgan, someone who cares about environmental impact and knows how to talk to people about making change happen. You'd have to learn the technology, work with Jamie and the team, but if you're serious about wanting to understand what I've built, what better way than being part of it? The offer hung between us, and I saw Victoria and my father exchange glances that suggested they thought I was either incredibly generous or slightly insane. Maybe both. Helen's eyes had filled with tears again, But this time they spilled over, running down her cheeks unchecked. "After everything I said last night," she whispered. "After years of making you feel like you weren't enough, you're offering me a place in your world?" I thought about all the ways this could go wrong, how working with my mother could complicate the professional space I'd built, how it might blur boundaries that needed to stay clear. But I also thought about the look on her face when she'd admitted to burying the part of herself that cared about making a difference. And I recognized it because I'd felt that same buried passion every time I'd absorbed their criticism and wondered if they were right about me. "I'm offering you a chance to reconnect with the work you loved," I said. "But Mother, it comes with conditions. You'd report to Jamie, not to me. You'd have to respect our company culture and processes. And you'd have to accept that this is my world, built my way. And it works precisely because it doesn't follow the corporate model you think success should look like." Helen nodded, wiping her eyes, something like hope dawning across her face. "I can do that," she said. "I want to do that. Not to fix things between us, though I hope it helps, but because you're right. I've spent 30 years playing a role that felt safe, and I've forgotten what it's like to be part of something that matters beyond my social circle." Victoria cleared her throat, and when I looked at her, she was smiling in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids, before the comparisons had driven a wedge between us. "Can I be honest about something?" she asked. Watching Alex talk about her work, seeing the way her whole face lights up when she explains the technology, I realized I don't have that. I'm good at what I do, successful by any measure, but I don't love it the way she loves what she's built. And maybe that's what's been underneath all of this, my quiet envy that she had the courage to follow something she actually cared about while I took the safe path. The admission surprised me more than anything else that morning. Victoria, the golden child, the one whose choices had always been celebrated, was confessing to envying the path I'd taken. "You could change paths," I said gently. "Success in one field doesn't lock you into it forever." She laughed, but it was tinged with sadness. "I'm a senior associate at one of the best firms in the city, Alex. I've spent 8 years building this career. The idea of starting over, of admitting I might want something different, it terrifies me." I understood that terror intimately, had lived with it through 4 years of choosing my passion over everyone's advice. "Terror means you're onto something real," I said. "The safe choices don't scare us because they keep us small enough to control. It's the big, honest choices that make our hands shake." My father, who'd been mostly quiet during this exchange, spoke up with uncharacteristic firmness. "I think we've all been living smaller than we needed to," he said. "Helen, maintaining the perfect house and perfect image. Victoria, building a career that looks good on paper but doesn't feed your soul. Me, staying quiet when I should have spoken up, playing it safe when I should have supported both my daughters in taking risks. And Alex, hiding her success because she didn't trust us to celebrate it." He looked around the table, meeting each of our eyes. "Last night was terrible, but maybe it needed to happen. Maybe we needed everything to break open so we could finally be honest about who we actually are instead of who we've been pretending to be." The cinnamon rolls had gone cold during our conversation, but Helen stood and began reheating them, the domestic gesture somehow not feeling like a retreat into her usual role but rather a moment to let everything we'd said settle. While she moved around the kitchen, Victoria pulled up her laptop again. But this time she wasn't taking notes about my technology. "I've been researching renewable energy law," she said. "There's a growing specialty in regulatory frameworks for sustainable technology. If I'm going to explore something different, maybe I start by bringing my legal skills to work that actually matters." She looked at me with hesitant hope. "Would your company need legal counsel? Someone who understands corporate structure, but could also navigate the environmental regulations you're going to face?" I felt a strange mix of excitement and concern. "Are you serious about this? Or is this a reaction to last night's drama?" Victoria closed her laptop, her expression sobering. "I'm serious. I've been thinking about leaving the firm for over a year, but didn't have a direction to move toward. This conversation, watching you defend work you believe in, it's clarified something I've been avoiding admitting to myself." My mother returned with warm cinnamon rolls, and we ate in thoughtful silence, each of us processing the unexpected directions the morning had taken. What had started as an apology breakfast had transformed into something else entirely, a reimagining of our family dynamic that felt both promising and fragile. I have a meeting with Warren Buffett in 3 days, I said finally. After that, after the investment is finalized in public, everything changes. The company will scale rapidly, the media attention will be significant, and there won't be space for figuring out family dynamics on the fly. So if we're going to do this, if Mother's going to join the company and Victoria's going to explore renewable energy law, we need to be clear about boundaries and expectations now. We spent the next hour mapping out what healthy family business boundaries might look like, with my father playing mediator when emotions ran high. Helen would start as a consultant, working with Jamie to develop community outreach strategies, with clear reporting structures that kept her role professional rather than maternal. Victoria would connect with our legal team to explore whether her firm could take us on as clients, or if not, what transitioning to environmental law might realistically look like. And I would work on trusting that their interest was genuine, that this wasn't just a reaction to discovering I was successful, but a real desire to reconnect with parts of themselves they'd buried. This is going to be messy, Victoria said as we were clearing the breakfast dishes. Us working together or adjacent to each other, while also trying to fix our family relationships. There's going to be moments where we slip back into old patterns. I nodded, appreciating her realism. Probably. But the old pattern was me making myself invisible while you all assumed I was failing. At least this mess will be happening in the light, with everyone actually seeing each other. My mother hugged me as I was leaving, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel performative or conditional. Thank you, she whispered against my hair, for giving me a chance to be part of something real again. I promise I won't let you down. I pulled back, meeting her eyes. Mother, you can't let me down in this because you're not doing it for me. You're doing it because you care about environmental impact and want to reconnect with that part of yourself. The moment it becomes about proving something to me or fixing our relationship, it stops being authentic. She nodded, understanding passing between us that felt like the beginning of something genuinely different. Driving back to my apartment, Portland still beautiful under its blanket of snow, I called Jamie to fill them in on the surreal morning. They listened without interrupting, and when I finished, they were quiet for a long moment. So your mother might join the company, your sister might become our legal counsel, and your family had actual honest conversations about feelings and regret. Are you sure you didn't slip into an alternate dimension? I laughed, the sound feeling lighter than it had in days. I'm not sure of anything except that Warren Buffett's phone call broke something open that apparently needed to break. Whether we can build something better from the pieces, that's still an open question. Jamie's voice softened. You know I support whatever you need, but Alex, be careful. Families are complicated, and mixing them with business when there's this much unresolved history, it could get messy fast. I knew they were right, but I also knew that the conversation this morning had felt more real than anything we'd shared as a family in years. The flight to Omaha was scheduled for December 27th, giving me one day between Christmas breakfast with my family and the meeting that would change everything. I spent that day in the office with Jamie and our core team, preparing presentations and financial projections, rehearsing answers to questions Warren Buffett might ask about scalability and manufacturing timelines. But underneath the professional preparation ran a current of disbelief that refused to settle. 3 months ago, we'd been wondering if we could afford to keep the office another year. Now I was boarding a plane to discuss a $15 million investment with one of the most successful investors in history. The cognitive dissonance was profound enough that I kept checking my email to confirm the meeting was real, that I hadn't imagined the entire thing during some stress-induced breakdown at my family's Christmas party. Jamie drove me to the airport there. Old Subaru rattling in ways that suggested it wouldn't survive another Portland winter. Remember, they said as we pulled up to departures, you've already won. The technology works, the data is validated, and Warren Buffett called you. This meeting is about partnership terms, not about proving yourself. I grabbed my bag from the back seat, suddenly wishing Jamie was coming with me. Their steady presence a counterweight to my anxiety. What if I freeze up? I asked. What if I get in that room and forget everything we've built? Jamie reached over, squeezing my hand with the familiarity of someone who'd been through every crisis and triumph of the past 4 years. Then you'll remember that you've already explained this technology to Nobel Prize-winning physicists, Department of Energy officials, and your mother on Christmas morning. If you could make Helen Morgan understand battery chemistry, you can handle Warren Buffett. The flight was uneventful, giving me 3 hours to oscillate between confidence and panic. I'd packed the prototype in a specialized case, its weight reassuring in the overhead bin, physical proof that what we'd built wasn't theoretical or aspirational but real and functional. The passenger next to me, a businessman absorbed in his laptop, had no idea he was sitting next to someone whose entire life was about to pivot. I wondered what he saw when he glanced at me. Probably just another tech worker heading to another meeting, unremarkable and forgettable. The invisibility was comfortable in a way I was beginning to recognize as protective. Soon, if everything went according to plan, I wouldn't be invisible anymore. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying in measures I couldn't quite balance. Omaha in late December was colder than Portland, the kind of dry cold that made your lungs ache and your eyes water. I took a cab from the airport to the hotel Warren's assistant had recommended, a modest place that somehow made me feel better about the meeting ahead. If Warren Buffett was suggesting 3-star hotels instead of luxury accommodations, maybe the meeting would be more substance than show. I checked in, ordered room service, and spent the evening reviewing our materials one more time, until the numbers and projections blurred together and Jamie texted me to please stop working and get some sleep. I tried, but sleep came in fits and starts, dreams mixing memories of my mother's face when Warren called with images of the meeting going catastrophically wrong, my prototype failing to work, my explanations coming out garbled and unconvincing. Morning arrived with pale winter light and a text from Victoria. "You're going to be amazing today. Call me after, I want to hear everything." Another from my father. "Proud of you, kid. Remember to breathe." And surprisingly, one from my mother. "I've been reading about Berkshire Hathaway's investment philosophy. Warren Buffett doesn't invest in technology he doesn't understand or people he doesn't trust. The fact that you have this meeting means he already believes in you." The messages steadied something that had been wobbling inside me since I'd woken up. Whatever happened in the next few hours, I had people in my corner now, imperfect and complicated as our relationships were, but genuine in their support. I dressed carefully, professional but not corporate, the version of myself that felt authentic rather than costumed, and took another cab to the address Warren's assistant had provided. The building was unexpectedly modest, none of the gleaming glass and steel I'd associated with major investment firms. Inside, the receptionist greeted me warmly, checked my name against her list, and directed me to a conference room on the 3rd floor. "Mr. Buffett will be with you shortly," she said. "Can I get you coffee or water?" I accepted coffee, needing something to do with my hands, and settled into the conference room that was comfortable but unpretentious. Exactly what I should have expected based on everything I'd read about Warren Buffett's approach to business. The walls held photographs of various investments and partnerships, companies that had started small and grown into industry leaders, and I wondered if our battery technology might someday be represented among them. Warren Buffett arrived exactly on time, accompanied by 2 colleagues he introduced as members of his energy investment team. He was shorter than I'd expected, his handshake firm but not aggressive, his eyes sharp and curious behind his glasses. "Alex," he said, settling into the chair across from me, "I've been looking forward to this conversation. Your preliminary data is impressive, but I want to understand the person behind the technology. Numbers tell part of the story, but the entrepreneur tells the rest." For the next 3 hours we talked. Not the formal pitch I'd rehearsed, though I delivered elements of it, but a genuine conversation about renewable energy challenges, battery chemistry breakthroughs, manufacturing scalability, and the vision Jamie and I had for making sustainable power storage accessible to communities that couldn't afford current solutions. Warren asked questions that revealed he'd done extensive homework, understanding not just our technology, but the broader market landscape and regulatory environment we'd be navigating. "What interests me," he said during a break in the technical discussion, "is that you and your partner chose to bootstrap this for 4 years instead of seeking early venture capital. That suggests either remarkable confidence or remarkable stubbornness." I smiled, recognizing the test in the question. Both probably. But mostly it was about maintaining control over our direction. We saw too many sustainable technology companies get pushed toward profitability timelines that compromised their environmental impact. We wanted to get the technology right before we scaled, even if it meant living on ramen and credit card debt. Warren nodded approvingly. That patience is rare and valuable. Too many founders optimize for exit strategies instead of lasting impact. "Tell me about your team. Who have you built this with? I told him about Jamie, about our core engineers and researchers, about the culture we deliberately cultivated where Friday afternoons were spent reconnecting with purpose instead of pushing for productivity. I showed him the prototype, walked him through the testing protocols and validation processes, explained our patent strategy and manufacturing timeline. His colleagues asked pointed questions about supply chain vulnerabilities and scaling challenges, stress testing our projections in ways that felt thorough rather than adversarial. By the time we broke for lunch, my initial nervousness had transformed into energized engagement. This wasn't an interrogation or performance, it was a collaboration. Transform an industry. Over lunch, the conversation shifted to something more personal. Warren asked about my background, my path to renewable energy technology, what had driven me to spend 4 years on something so risky. I found myself telling him about my family, about dropping out of law school to pursue something I actually cared about the years of being compared unfavorably to my successful sister. My mother told me I was wasting my life, I said. Right up until you called during Christmas Eve dinner. Warren laughed, the sound genuinely delighted. I do love good timing. And your family's response? I thought about the complicated breakfast conversation, Helen's tears and Victoria's admissions, the fragile beginning of something more honest. They're trying to understand. It's messy and complicated, but we're talking in ways we haven't in years. Warren set down his fork, his expression turning thoughtful. Family and business make for complex combinations, he said. My own children have had to navigate their relationship to Berkshire Hathaway, figure out who they are separate from their father's success. It's not easy, but it's worthwhile work when everyone's committed to honest communication. He paused, then added, I mention this because one of my colleagues flagged something interesting. Your mother, Helen Morgan, has a background in environmental advocacy? I nodded, surprised he knew this. She did years ago. She's actually expressed interest in joining our company's community outreach efforts. Warren's smile suggested he'd anticipated this. That could be valuable or complicated, possibly both. My advice, based on decades of mixing family with business? Clear roles, clearer boundaries, and regular check-ins to address tensions before they calcify. If you can navigate that successfully, having people you trust in key positions is an asset. If not, it can undermine everything you've built. The afternoon session focused on investment structure and partnership terms. Warren's team walked through their proposed $15 million initial investment, what it would purchase in terms of equity and board representation, their expectations for scaling timeline and additional funding rounds. The numbers were more favorable than I dared hope, structured in ways that protected both their investment and our operational independence. We're not interested in controlling your company, Warren explained. We're interested in enabling its growth while maintaining the vision and values that make it promising. You and Jamie will retain majority control, make the key strategic decisions, build this the way you believe it should be built. We'll provide capital, strategic guidance, and access to our network, but this remains your company. By the time we concluded, the sun was setting outside the conference room windows, Omaha's winter evening arriving early and cold. I'll need to discuss the terms with Jamie and our legal counsel, I said, gathering the documents Warren's team had provided. But preliminarily, this looks like exactly the kind of partnership we'd hoped for. Warren stood, extending his hand again. Take your time, review everything carefully, and let us know if you have questions or concerns. Based on this conversation, assuming your team agrees with the terms, I'd like to announce the investment by mid-January. That gives you 2 weeks to get everything aligned internally. He walked me to the elevator, his manner as warm and unpretentious as it had been throughout the meeting. You've built something remarkable, Alex, he said as the elevator doors opened. Not just the technology, though that's impressive enough, but the integrity with which you've built it. That's what convinced me to take this call in the first place, and it's what convinced me today that this investment will be one I'm proud of. The flight back to Portland felt surreal, the investment terms and Warren's words replaying in my mind on an endless loop. I'd gone to Omaha hoping for validation, and emerged with a partnership that exceeded everything I'd imagined. Jamie picked me up at the airport, reading my expression before I said anything. That good? They asked. Better, I managed. Jamie, we did it. We actually did it. We drove back to the office instead of my apartment, both of us too wired to sleep, and I walked Jamie through every detail of the meeting. The technical questions, the terms Warren's team had proposed, his advice about family business dynamics, his timeline for announcing the investment. By the time I finished, Jamie was grinning in a way I hadn't seen since the day our efficiency numbers first hit 93%. 15 million, they said, shaking their head in disbelief. With favorable terms and majority control retained. Alex, do you understand what this means? We can move out of this cramped office your mother hates so much. We can hire the team we need for production scaling. We can actually manufacture this technology at the volumes required to make a real environmental impact. The implications cascaded through my mind, each one opening new possibilities. We'll need to tell the team, I said. And my family, they'll want to know how it went. And our legal counsel needs to review the partnership documents. And the patent office, we should push to expedite those applications now that we have Berkshire Hathaway behind us. Jamie put a hand on my shoulder, grounding me before I could spiral into the endless list of tasks ahead. All of that happens tomorrow, they said gently. Tonight, we just sit with the fact that we succeeded. For years of work, of doubt, of people thinking we were crazy or foolish or wasting our potential, and we were right all along. I called my family from the office, putting them on speaker so Jamie could hear. My father answered, with Victoria and my mother clearly nearby based on the overlapping questions that immediately erupted. How did it go? What did he say? Are you okay? I laughed, the sound releasing tension I hadn't realized I was carrying. It went better than I could have imagined, I said. Warren's investing $15 million with terms that let Jamie and I retain control. We're announcing the partnership in mid-January. The speaker erupted with congratulations and questions, my mother's voice cutting through with uncharacteristic emotion. Alex, I'm so proud of you. Genuinely deeply proud. Not because of the money or Warren Buffett's name, but because you built something that matters and you never gave up even when we gave you every reason to doubt yourself. Her words hit harder than I expected, tears I'd been holding back since the meeting finally spilling over. Victoria's legal mind immediately activated, asking practical questions about the partnership documents and whether she could review them. Not as your sister, she clarified, but as an attorney who wants to make sure these terms actually protect your interests the way they should. I appreciated the boundary she was drawing, the professional distance that kept her support from feeling like intrusion. My father was quieter, but when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Your mother and I have been talking, he said. About a lot of things, but especially about the years we spent not seeing you clearly. I know one good meeting doesn't erase that history, but I hope you know we're committed to doing better. To actually knowing you instead of projecting our expectations onto your life. The conversation lasted another hour, practical questions mixing with emotional processing, all of us navigating this new dynamic where they actually understood what I'd built, and I was learning to trust their interest as genuine. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Jamie and I reviewed the partnership documents with Victoria, who confirmed they were not just fair but unusually favorable for an early-stage investment. Our patent attorney expedited the applications, confident that Berkshire Hathaway's backing would help navigate the complex approval process. We scheduled a company meeting to announce the investment to our team, watching their reactions range from stunned silence to actual tears of relief and joy. The cramped office that had been our home for 4 years suddenly felt too small to contain the possibilities expanding around us. My mother reached out through official channels, asking to schedule a meeting with Jamie about the community outreach consultant position. I appreciated that she went through proper channels instead of leveraging our family connection, respecting the boundaries we discussed on Christmas morning. Jamie met with her twice, coming away impressed despite their initial skepticism. She actually knows this stuff, Jamie reported after the second meeting. The advocacy strategies, the community engagement approaches, it's not theoretical for her. She has decades of experience we'd be stupid not to utilize. Helen officially joined the company in early January, starting with a project to identify communities that would benefit most from affordable renewable energy storage. She worked from home mostly, coming into the office for weekly meetings with Jamie, maintaining professional distance that felt deliberate and appropriate. When she did come in, I watched her interact with the team, seeing a version of my mother I'd never known existed. She was engaged without being controlling, knowledgeable without being condescending, passionate about the work in ways that reminded me uncomfortably of myself. Victoria connected our company with environmental law specialists at a firm she'd been consulting with, then surprised everyone by announcing she was leaving her corporate position to focus full-time on sustainable technology legal work. "Life's too short to build a career that doesn't mean anything," she told me over coffee. "Watching you defend what you'd built, it clarified that I've been playing it safe for too long." The announcement of Berkshire Hathaway's investment happened on January 15th, coordinated through both companies' public relations teams. The press release hit business news outlets first, then rippled out to mainstream media as journalists recognized the significance of Warren Buffett backing renewable energy storage technology. My phone exploded with interview requests, investor inquiries, and messages from people I hadn't heard from in years suddenly interested in reconnecting. Jamie and I had prepared for media attention intellectually, but experiencing it was overwhelming in ways we hadn't anticipated. Suddenly, the invisible work of 4 years was hypervisible, examined and analyzed by people who'd never heard of me or our technology before yesterday. The attention was validating and invasive in equal measure, confirming that we'd built something significant, while also stripping away any remaining privacy about my professional choices. The response from my extended family was particularly interesting. Aunt Diane sent a long email about how she'd always believed in me, revising history so thoroughly I almost admired her commitment to the fiction. Cousin Brandon invited me to speak at some entrepreneurship event he was organizing, suddenly treating me as a resource rather than the disappointing relative who'd dropped out of law school. Uncle Greg reached out to discuss investment opportunities, his financial advisor having identified our next funding round as potentially lucrative. I handled each interaction with polite distance, recognizing that their interest was transactional rather than genuine, a response to my newfound visibility rather than actual relationship. My mother, surprisingly, was the one who called them out. "Don't bother your cousin," I overheard her tell Diane during a phone conversation. "Alex doesn't need Fairweather family pretending they supported her all along." By February, we'd moved into a new office space in downtown Portland, large enough to accommodate the team we were rapidly hiring. The move itself felt symbolic, physically leaving behind the cramped space where we'd built the technology while everyone assumed I was failing. The new office had actual conference rooms, a proper laboratory for continued research and development, space for the manufacturing coordination team we were building. Jamie and I stood in the empty main room the day before our furniture arrived, both of us quiet as we processed how far we'd come. "Your mother would approve of this space," Jamie said, their tone carefully neutral. "Plenty of room, professional appearance, the kind of office that makes sense to people who measure success by square footage." I smiled, recognizing the gentle teasing. "She's actually been helpful with the community outreach work," I admitted. "It's strange seeing her in this professional context. She's good at this, Jamie. Really good." The first major media interview happened in March, a profile piece for a national business magazine about women in sustainable technology. The journalist wanted to know about my journey, the breakthrough that led to our battery chemistry innovation, what it felt like to have Warren Buffett's endorsement. But she also asked about my family, having done research that uncovered the timeline of my 4 years in relative obscurity followed by sudden recognition. "Your mother's involvement in the company is interesting," the journalist noted. "Was there family tension around your career choices before this success?" I'd prepared for this question with Jamie and our communications consultant, knowing that the Christmas Eve confrontation could easily become the story if I wasn't careful. "My family had concerns about stability and traditional career paths," I said carefully. "They've since recognized that success looks different for different people. My mother's environmental advocacy now an asset to our community outreach work." The article, when it published, was more nuanced than I expected. It touched on family dynamics without sensationalizing them, positioned my journey as emblematic of broader challenges women face when choosing unconventional paths, and gave proper weight to the technology itself rather than focusing solely on the Warren Buffett connection. My mother called after reading it, her voice unsteady. "Thank you," she said, "for not throwing me under the bus. You could have told her everything about Christmas Eve about the years before that, and it would have made a compelling story. But you protected our privacy even though I didn't deserve that protection." I sat with her gratitude, recognizing it as another step in our slowly rebuilding relationship. "I didn't protect you, Mother," I said gently. "I protected us. The real story of what happened in our family isn't anyone's business but ours." Victoria's transition to environmental law was going well, her corporate litigation skills translating effectively to regulatory frameworks and sustainable technology advocacy. She'd taken our company as her first major client, working on patent protection strategies and regulatory compliance for our upcoming manufacturing partnerships. "I'm making about 40% less than I did at the firm," she told me during one of our now regular coffee meetings. "But I actually care about the work. I go home energized instead of exhausted. It turns out money isn't much compensation for spending your life on things that don't matter to you." I thought about the 4 years I'd spent barely making rent, the struggle that my family had interpreted as failure, and recognized that Victoria was now walking a version of that same path. "It gets easier," I said. "The financial anxiety, I mean. Not immediately, but gradually you stop measuring your worth by your salary." My father had been quieter through all of this, supportive but less involved in the company developments than my mother and sister. When we finally had lunch, just the two of us, he explained why. "I've been watching your mother reconnect with work she loves, watching Victoria find courage to change directions, and I've been thinking about my own choices," he said. "I built a successful real estate development company, provided well for our family, but I'm not sure I ever loved it the way you love your work. I just did what made sense, what seemed responsible, and convinced myself that was enough." He paused, stirring his coffee with more attention than it required. "I'm 65 years old, Alex. Old enough that starting over seems impossible, young enough that I could have another 20 productive years. And I've been wondering what I'd do with those years if I wasn't just maintaining what I've already built." The vulnerability in his admission surprised me. This man who'd always seemed content with his conventional success suddenly questioning whether contentment was the same as fulfillment. "What would you do?" I asked. "If you could do anything?" He smiled a little sadly. "I've always been fascinated by sustainable urban development, the intersection of housing and environmental impact. When I started in real estate, green building was fringe thinking. Now it's becoming mainstream, and I wonder if there's a role for someone with my experience in building affordable housing that also reduces carbon footprint." I leaned forward, an idea forming. "Our battery technology, one of the applications we're developing, is for residential use. Imagine housing developments where every unit has integrated renewable energy storage, where communities can essentially operate off-grid or sell excess power back to utilities. That requires someone who understands both real estate development and sustainable technology." My father's expression shifted, hope lighting something that had seemed resigned just moments before. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" I nodded slowly, thinking through the implications. "Our next phase includes pilot programs with residential developers. We need someone who can bridge the gap between our technology and practical housing applications, someone developers will take seriously because they speak the same language. Dad, you could build the housing developments you wish had existed when you were starting out, integrating our technology from the ground up." The possibility seemed to energize him in ways I'd rarely witnessed, this man who'd been passively supportive suddenly becoming actively engaged with reimagining his own path. We spent the rest of lunch mapping out what this might look like, how his experience could complement our technology, what pilot programs might demonstrate the viability of sustainable residential energy independence. By spring, my family's involvement in the company had evolved into something that mostly worked despite occasional complications. Helen ran community outreach with competence that impressed even Jamie's initial skepticism, connecting with local governments and environmental groups, identifying communities where our technology could make immediate impact. Victoria's legal work protected our intellectual property and navigated regulatory requirements across multiple states as we expanded manufacturing partnerships. My father had officially retired from his real estate company and joined us as a consultant for residential applications, bringing credibility and connections that opened doors with housing developers who might have dismissed a pure technology startup. The boundaries weren't always clean, family dynamics sometimes bleeding into professional interactions, but we'd established processes for addressing tensions before they undermined the work. The first major manufacturing partnership was finalized in June, A deal with an established battery producer that would scale our technology to commercial production volumes. Jamie and I flew to their facilities in Nevada, walking through the plant where our chemistry would soon be manufactured at scales we'd only theorized about in our cramped original office. This is what it was all for, Jamie said, watching assembly lines that would soon be producing our battery systems. Every failed prototype, every maxed-out credit card, every person who thought we were crazy, it all led to this. I thought about my mother's Christmas Eve declaration that I was wasting my life, about the years I'd absorbed doubt while privately believing in what we were building, and felt not vindication exactly but something more like peace. The people who hadn't seen the value in my work didn't get to claim credit for it now. But they also didn't need to become villains in a story of overcoming adversity. They'd been wrong, I'd been right, and we were all doing the work of acknowledging that reality while building something better. The second Christmas after Warren Buffett's call felt profoundly different from the first. My family gathered again at my parents' house in West Lynn, but this time there were no elaborate performances, no photographer staging perfect family portraits, no unspoken comparisons hanging in the air. Helen was tired from a successful but demanding year of community outreach work. Victoria was excited about a major regulatory victory she'd secured for our patents, and my father was deep in planning for a pilot housing development that would be the first to integrate our technology from the ground up. We cooked together, shared stories from the year, acknowledged how far we'd all come not just professionally, but in learning to see each other clearly. When my mother proposed a toast, she didn't celebrate my success or Warren Buffett's investment or the company's growing valuation. Instead, she raised her glass and said simply, "To honest conversations and second chances. To building things that matter and having the courage to start over when we need to." Victoria added her own toast, looking directly at me. "To my sister, who was brave enough to disappoint everyone's expectations, and wise enough to teach us that disappointment was really our failure to understand what we were looking at." My father's contribution was quieter but no less meaningful. To all of us, for doing the hard work of becoming who we actually are instead of who we thought we should be. The evening wasn't perfect, old tensions occasionally surfacing when we fell into familiar patterns, but there was an underlying authenticity that had been absent from every previous family gathering. We existed as complicated, flawed people trying genuinely to know and support each other, rather than as actors playing assigned roles in my mother's vision of a perfect family. Later that night, after most of the family had left and I was helping my mother clean up, she paused at the sink, hands in soapy water, and spoke without looking at me. "I've been thinking about what I said to you last year," she said quietly. "About why you couldn't be more like Victoria, about wasting your life. I knew at the time I was being cruel, but I told myself it was honesty you needed to hear. The truth is I was terrified of your courage. Terrified that if I acknowledged what you were doing was valid, I'd have to acknowledge that I'd given up on my own passions for what seemed like sensible choices. You were a mirror showing me what I'd buried, and I hated you for it even though I loved you desperately." The admission was raw enough that I set down the dish I was drying and turned to face her fully. "Mother, you don't have to keep apologizing. We've both moved forward." She shook her head, finally meeting my eyes. "I'm not apologizing again. I'm explaining because I want you to understand it was never really about you. Every criticism, every comparison to Victoria, every suggestion that you needed to be more practical, it was all me projecting my regrets onto your choices. And the worst part is, even when I was saying those terrible things, part of me was desperately proud of you for having courage I'd never managed." She wiped her eyes with a soapy hand, leaving bubbles on her cheek that would have been funny in any other moment. "You saved my life, Alex. Not from anything dramatic, but from the slow suffocation of pretending my identity as the perfect wife and mother was enough. This work I'm doing now, it reminds me who I was before I decided passion was impractical. So thank you, not just for forgiving me but for showing me it's not too late to be someone who matters beyond maintaining appearances." The cleanup finished in comfortable silence, both of us processing a year that had transformed not just my professional life, but our entire family's understanding of success and fulfillment. As I was leaving, my father pulled me aside for one of his quiet, meaningful conversations. "Your mother's not wrong about you saving her life," he said. "But you also saved mine in a way. Watching you build something you cared about while everyone doubted you, it made me question whether contentment with conventional success was the same as living fully. I spent 40 years building a company that provided security but not meaning, and I'd convinced myself that was what responsible adults did. You proved that responsibility and passion aren't opposing forces, that maybe the most responsible thing is building a life that actually matters to you. He hugged me tightly, this man who'd loved me quietly through years of family dysfunction, who'd never been brave enough to defend me but was now brave enough to change his own life. I'm proud of you, kid. Always have been, but now I'm brave enough to say it out loud. The drive back to my apartment took me past the old office where Jamie and I had spent 4 years building our technology, while my family assumed I was failing. The space was dark now, occupied by some other startup chasing their own unlikely dreams, and I felt a wave of affection for that cramped room and everything it represented. The doubt and determination, the late nights and early mornings, the moments of despair and breakthrough, all of it had been necessary to arrive at where I was now. Not just professionally successful, though that was undeniably satisfying, but free from the weight of other people's expectations. I'd built a life that made sense to me, proven that my instincts were sound, and in the process had helped my family members reconnect with their own abandoned dreams and suppressed authenticity. My phone buzzed with a text from Jamie, who'd spent Christmas with their own complicated family. Survived the Morgan family gathering? Everyone still speaking to each other? I smiled, typing back. Survived and actually enjoyed most of it. Turns out honest conversation and mutual respect make family gatherings significantly less painful. Revolutionary concept. Their response came quickly. Who are you and what have you done with my cynical business partner? I laughed out loud in my car, feeling lighter than I had in years. The truth was I wasn't cynical anymore, at least not about my family. They were still flawed and complicated, still capable of falling into old patterns when stressed, but they were trying. Helen was building meaningful work after decades of performing perfection. Victoria had chosen purpose over prestige in her career. My father was reimagining his final working years around sustainability, instead of just maintaining what he'd built. And I had learned that proving people wrong was less satisfying than helping them see clearly what had been there all along. The company continued growing through the next year, our battery technology moving from pilot programs to commercial deployment, manufacturing partnerships expanding across multiple continents, media attention becoming something we managed rather than something that overwhelmed us. Jamie and I remained the heart of the operation, but we'd built a team around us that shared our vision and values, people who cared about environmental impact as much as profit margins. My family's involvement remained mostly positive, occasional tensions resolved through the honest communication processes we'd established. Helen's community outreach connected our technology with populations that needed it most, prioritizing impact over markets that would generate fastest returns. Victoria's legal work protected not just our patents but the integrity of our mission, ensuring regulatory frameworks didn't compromise environmental benefits. My father's residential pilot programs demonstrated that sustainable energy independence could be affordable and practical for average homeowners, not just wealthy early adopters. 2 years after Warren Buffett's Christmas Eve phone call, I was invited to speak at a renewable energy conference, sharing our journey from cramped office to commercial viability. The audience was full of other entrepreneurs and scientists working on climate solutions, people who understood the particular challenge of building something meaningful in a world that often prioritized short-term profits over long-term impact. During the question and answer session, someone asked about dealing with skepticism from family during the early uncertain years. I paused, thinking about how to answer honestly without oversharing personal details that weren't relevant to professional context. My family didn't understand what I was building for a long time, I said finally. They were concerned about stability and conventional success markers, and they expressed those concerns in ways that were sometimes hurtful. But their doubt was rooted in love and fear, even when it didn't feel that way. The breakthrough in our relationship came when they saw me succeed on my own terms and realized their definition of success had been too narrow. I continued, feeling the emotional weight of the journey even as I tried to keep my tone professional. What I learned is that you can't make people understand your vision before you've proven it, and you shouldn't waste energy trying. Build what you believe in, find partners who share your values, and trust that the people who matter will eventually see what you've created. Some of them will apologize for doubting you. Some will revise their memories to pretend they always believed. And some will simply show up differently in the present without explicitly acknowledging the past. All of those responses are okay if you've done the internal work of validating yourself independent of their approval. The audience was quiet, and I realized I'd gone deeper than typical conference Q&A warranted, but several people approached me afterward to share their own stories of family skepticism and eventual recognition. That evening, I video called with Jamie, both of us in hotel rooms in different cities, our expanding company requiring more travel than we'd anticipated. I got emotional during the Q&A today, I admitted. Someone asked about family skepticism, and I basically gave them my entire psychological journey instead of a professional soundbite. Jamie grinned, their face pixelated on my laptop screen. Good. The professional soundbites are boring anyway. People need to hear that building something meaningful is emotionally complicated, that family dynamics don't neatly resolve just because you succeed, that vindication feels different than you imagine when you're in the middle of being doubted. We talked for another hour, mapping out the company's next phase, discussing new applications for our technology, planning for the day when we could step back from daily operations and focus on research and development again. The business side of success required attention and energy, but our hearts were still in the laboratory, in the problem-solving and innovation that had driven us from the beginning. 3 years after that Christmas Eve phone call, our company was valued at over $300 million, employed 200 people across 4 countries, and had deployed battery storage systems that were reducing carbon emissions by measurable amounts. Warren Buffett remained an involved investor and occasional advisor, his initial confidence in our technology vindicated many times over. My family's involvement had evolved and stabilized, each of them finding their niche within or adjacent to the company, contributing in ways that felt authentic rather than obligatory. And I had somehow become a public figure in sustainable technology, invited to speak at conferences and quoted in articles, a responsibility I still found uncomfortable, but was learning to navigate with Jamie's help and occasional reluctance. The success was real and significant, but what mattered most to me wasn't the valuation or media recognition or even the environmental impact, though that was profoundly meaningful. What mattered was that I trusted my instincts when everyone around me suggested I was wrong, built something I believed in despite years of doubt, and in the process had helped the people I loved most reconnect with their own abandoned dreams and authentic selves. My mother was happier and more engaged than I'd ever seen her. Victoria had built a legal career that aligned with her values. My father was designing sustainable housing developments that integrated our technology from conception, and I was living a life that made sense to me, surrounded by work that mattered and relationships that were honest, even when they were complicated. On the 4th anniversary of Warren Buffett's call, my family gathered again for Christmas, this time at a cabin my parents had rented in the mountains. The setting was beautiful and unpretentious, snow falling outside floor-to-ceiling windows, a fire crackling in the stone fireplace, and none of the elaborate decorations or performances that had characterized my mother's previous holiday gatherings. We cooked together, played board games, told stories, and existed as people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company, rather than as actors fulfilling assigned roles. At some point during the evening, Victoria pulled out her phone and showed us a photo from that Christmas Eve 4 years earlier, the family portrait where my mother had positioned me in the back row, partially hidden. We all looked at it quietly, seeing clearly what we'd been then and recognizing how far we'd traveled. Should we recreate it? My father suggested. Same positions, but now everyone knows what Alex built? I shook my head, understanding the impulse but recognizing why it wouldn't work. No, I said gently. That photo represents a version of our family that doesn't exist anymore. We don't need to recreate it ironically or reclaim it symbolically. We just need to keep building the version of us that's actually real. My mother, who'd been quiet during this exchange, spoke up with uncharacteristic emotion. Alex is right. That photo was my attempt to create an image of family perfection that required making my daughter invisible. I don't want to recreate that even as a joke. I want to take a photo where everyone is visible, where we're arranged by affection rather than hierarchy, where the image reflects who we actually are rather than who I thought we should appear to be. We took that photo, all of us together, no one hidden or diminished, captured by my father's phone timer while we laughed at our awkward posing. It wasn't a perfect photo, technically speaking, but it was honest in ways the staged portrait from 4 years earlier had never been. When I looked at it later, I didn't see success or vindication or transformation. I just saw my family, complicated and imperfect, and trying genuinely to see each other clearly. That was the real achievement. Not the company valuation or Warren Buffett's investment or the media recognition, but the slow, difficult work of building authentic relationships from the wreckage of years of misunderstanding and hurt. The Christmas party where my mother had declared me unsuccessful felt like a lifetime ago. A moment that had shattered something that needed to break, so we could build something better from the pieces. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.